I want to tell you about a house I walked into not long ago. Beautiful place. 2 brand new cars in the driveway. The Australian dream. On the surface, it looked like success. Let's call them Dave and Joanne. But the moment I stepped in, you could feel the tension. So I asked them why they were selling. Joanne explained to me it was debt. Underneath that perfect veneer, it was all financed. And it was catching up with them. Not suddenly, but slowly. Little by little, month by month. And that's a perfect description of the market we are in right now. Nothing looks broken, but you can feel it. Over 1.3 million Aussie households are in mortgage stress. And the shocking part of this story is that many others are going to be joining them. Here we are again. You're trying to work out if you should buy or whether it's time to sell. Either way, you end up with whiplash. 1 minute it's boom, next minute it's bust. The banks are saying one thing, the economists are saying another, and YouTubers, they are just doom and gloom. No wonder you don't know who to believe. This isn't another noisy prediction. Not a prediction, a stress test. So even you're in your late 20s or 30s and you've been waiting for a crash to get into the market, I get it. A lot of young Aussies feel like they'll never own a home. And when the market feels that closed, waiting for a collapse makes perfect sense. But instead of another crash prediction, I want to show you how to read the market. But to read the market, you must first understand what pressure is, what pressure actually looks like from the inside. And when you can understand what pressure is, you can read the market for yourself. So here are the usual questions. Where, when, and how? We are in the property clock. Where is the market heading? When will the market crack? And how will we know we have arrived at the destination to buy and sell? To answer these questions, we must first learn that there are 2 layers to understanding where the market is headed. The first layer is called the triggers. These are the 3 conditions that have to align before the market breaks. These are the things to watch out for, because when we see all 3 line up together, that's when the market cracks. The second layer is the signs that can tell you exactly how close those triggers are to aligning. So let's look at the triggers. So the triggers will tell you what to watch for, and the signs will tell you where you are in the current cycle right now. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what to look for, because when you can read the signs, you'll never look at a clearance rate, listing numbers, or an RBA decision the same way. The 3 triggers of a market failure. Number 1, credit tightens. The banks actively pull back. Lending criteria get stricter. Your actual ability to borrow money shrinks. Number 2, unemployment rises significantly. The pool of unqualified buyers drops out of the market entirely, because if you don't have a job, you can't get a loan. Number 3, forced selling. People have absolutely no choice but to liquidate, regardless of what price they get it on the auction day. This is the most critical piece. Forced selling is what actually moves markets downwards. Necessity moves markets, not public opinion, not consumer sentiment surveys, not newspaper headlines. Because if you don't have to sell and the offers are low, you can pull the house off the market and stay put. You can wait it out. That restricts supply and keeps prices artificially high. Right now we are seeing intense pressure building across all 3 triggers, but we don't have the full fatal combination firing simultaneously. Not yet. That's why the market hasn't broken. Sure, it's bending, and the governments have a vested interest in keeping the market's ability to bend rather than crack. If you want to know more about this, watch my previous video. But the market is deeply fracturing, but those 3 conditions haven't fully aligned to force mass liquidation. Watch for the changes. The first one is sign number 1, economic pressure. Think about a family that bought a home when money was incredibly cheap a few years ago. Since the Reserve Bank started aggressively pushing rates up through 2025, their monthly mortgage repayments have skyrocketed. Now we're talking an increase of $1,000 to $1,500 every month, just to stay in the exact same house, just to keep the bank at bay. That immediately wipes out whatever discretionary savings they had. And it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You add the surging cost of living on top of that, debt servicing. Petrol is up 40 to 60 cents a litre or more in just a few weeks, and that hits the family commute. The school run. Suddenly you're bleeding an extra $50 to $100 a week just to move around, but you still need to drive to work. And then you add the creeping unavoidable costs of groceries, health insurance, utility bills. They don't spike dramatically, but they don't come back either. And the way consumers respond to this is totally predictable. They don't default on the house on day one. It's a train wreck in slow motion. What they do is they aggressively cut the optional things out first. Cancel a family holiday, stop dining out, don't upgrade the car, the easy stuff. But when that's not enough, they start cutting the smaller everyday things. Cancel the streaming service they no longer use, switch to home brand groceries, delay dental appointments. People aren't officially failing yet. They're just slowly, methodically running out of room to manoeuvre. The buffer is gone. This is what people miss. Housing stress just doesn't arrive as a crash, it shows up as a slow compression. You don't panic when prices fall, you panic when the monthly budget stops working and repayments are due. That's the moment people start making very different decisions. And you can see this already being reflected in the auction data. Clearance rates are softening, not collapsing but trending down. That's often the first signal that demand is shifting. All the pressure building and prices are still holding. So, what's actually keeping it together and how long can it last? Sign number 2, interest rates uncertainty. You'd think that the people at the very top, the people literally steering the economic ship, would have a clear plan for navigating this. Let's look at what the Reserve Bank actually did just a few days ago. On March the 17th, they hiked the cash rates to 4.1%. It's just a quarter of a percent, but in the banking world, that tiny fraction translates to massive immediate shifts in what you pay your lender. It evaporates whatever breathing room your family had left. But what shocked many in the industry was that for the first time since the RBA began publishing internal vote tallies back in July 25, the board was deeply and fundamentally fractured, split almost down the middle. It was a 5-4 vote compared to the 6-3 vote back in July. 3 decades of watching this market, I have never seen the board split like that, not once. And they've been publishing this vote since July 2025. The fact that it fractured on the very first contested decision tells you something about the uncertain economic times we're in. In the early 90s, people weren't watching prices, they were watching whether they could hold on for another month. That's the kind of pressure that changes markets, and it's starting to feel familiar. Governor Michelle Bullock took a hawkish stance, aggressively focused on stamping out inflation, even if it causes immediate economic pain. She cited domestic demand as a main driver. She even made the point that skyrocketing petrol prices weren't the main reason for the hike. Inflation was already a domestic problem before the oil shock. Now look at the 4 dissenters. They weren't voting for lower rates. They were voting to wait until May. Same destination, just a different timeline. What they were saying is, our models might be lagging behind the real world pain. We need to check the map before we accidentally break the economy. And if the people setting your interest rates can't agree on what's right, what does that tell you about trusting anyone's forecast, even including mine? The 5-4 split tells us that the standard economic modelling is currently failing to predict how Australian households are actually reacting to this debt load. And while the RBA is sitting in that boardroom in Sydney arguing over domestic demand models, there is a massive external variable sitting entirely outside their control, a wild card their models can't fully account for. Coming up next, a single event outside Australia is about to make everything you've just heard worse, and most people haven't connected the dots yet. So what is a black swan event? It simply means something came out of nowhere and knocked everything sideways, and no one saw it coming. No one planned for it, and afterwards everyone reckons they did. It's the thing that blindsides you, and suddenly all the rules you believed in go out the window. So what is the current black swan event for the Australian housing market? The Strait of Hormuz. A massive portion of the world's oil supply flows through that single maritime choke. Right now, it's facing severe disruptions. As a direct result, we're seeing global oil prices jump from around $75 a barrel to well over $100 or even more a barrel. A price spike of more than 30% in just a matter of weeks. Energy shocks don't just push prices up, they change how people act. When oil spikes, it drives up transportation and logistics costs, which drives up inflation across the board. Persistent inflation forces the RBA to keep rates high or hike them further. And those high interest rates drive mortgage stress directly into your living room. It all connects back to the kitchen table. High prices aren't the fatal flaw for the property market in their own, but debt suddenly you cannot service does, because the entire cost of living has jumped 15%. That is the fatal flaw. And to make matters worse, the ACCC has just put out a notice highlighting something highly abnormal. Wholesale and retail fuel prices in Australia are surging simultaneously. Usually there's a lag. The global wholesale prices goes up, and a few weeks later retailers slowly pass it on at the pump. The consumer gets a little bit of a warning. Right now the transmission is instant and the buffer is gone. Here's a systemic vulnerability that rarely makes the evening news. The Australian currently has only 36 days of refined fuel supply in reserve, just over 5 weeks. In a highly disrupted global market, that's not a headline, that's a vulnerability. Think about the construction industry, the concrete trucks, the earth movers, the logistics of moving timber and steel. If fuel costs skyrocket or supply seizes up, the cost of building a new home explodes. Construction companies go under, the supply of new housing stops entirely, which twists the knife further into this property fracture. All of this rates fuel compression is pressure on the system, but pressure is invisible until it shows up somewhere specific. And right now it's showing up in a place most people walk straight past every Saturday morning.
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
And to quote Bob Ansett, perception is reality. If you're a buyer opening up the real estate apps every weekend, everything still looks red hot. Auctions are packed, clearance rates look amazing. It feels completely disconnected from everything I've just described. And that's because you're looking at what I call the Saturday illusion. Every Saturday evening, the preliminary auction clearance rates gets blasted out by the media, and they always look incredibly strong. You might see a headline screaming that the clearance rate in your city is over 70%. That sounds great if you're selling, and it creates massive fear of missing out for buyers. One of the oldest lessons in property analysis is don't mistake early sentiment for final truth. Saturday is the market's first draft, not its final result. Saturday tells you what the agents hope. The final numbers tell you what the buyers actually did. Here's why that gap exists. On Saturday, real estate agents actively report the good news first. The properties that sold well above reserve, that get lodged in the data systems immediately. But the properties that were passed in, where the bidding failed to meet the seller's minimum reserve price, those trickle slowly over the following week. And the properties quietly withdrawn from the market entirely, same thing. So the truth drops significantly. During the week of March 8, the preliminary clearance rate was an impressive 72%. By the time all the data was finalised by Thursday, it had dropped to 57%. But that was a relatively quiet week, the Melbourne Grand Prix weekend. In a normal, high volume week, the gap is still 5 to 8 points. The direction is consistent. It means nearly half the properties going to auction are actually failing to sell under the hammer. Some areas, particularly in Sydney, are clearing in the 30s. Melbourne's been around the low 40s. And that is SQM Research's figure, it's not my figure, which counts every scheduled auction, including those quietly withdrawn. The numbers most people see are higher because they only count the ones that are actually reported. For example, the widely reported REIV number looks higher because it only counts auctions where the results were actually lodged. Same Saturday, different denominator. That gap is itself part of the illusion. Demand is quietly walking away. Buyers are hitting their absolute borrowing limits and hesitating. For example, the average number of registered bidders at the auction in Sydney has fallen by over 40% from a year ago. New listings are running above their 5-year averages, roughly 10% above in Sydney, a bit higher in Melbourne. Sellers are not waiting. The urgency is visible in the data. They're trying to sell before the next rate hike. That's not confidence, that's urgency. Half the market's accelerating, the other half stalling, and most people don't know which one they're in. What I'm seeing right now is actually what I call the two-speed fracture. Same country, different pressure. Let me be clear, as of early 2026, there is no single Australian property market. We have diverged into completely separate camps. The sprinters and the flatliners. The sprinters are Perth and Brisbane. The data there is extraordinary. Perth is up over 20% for the year. Brisbane up another 16% for the year overall, with units leading the growth at over 20%. But you have to understand the mechanism. This isn't because of some miraculous booming local economy where everything is getting massive pay rises, driven almost entirely by a severe critical lack of supply. Why is Perth up 20% when they're facing the exact same 4.1% interest rates and the exact same inflation as the rest of the country? Because the supply constraints override credit constraints. You've got significant interstate migration, investors from the eastern states chasing higher yields, more people wanting fewer homes, combined with the paralysis in the new dwelling construction, partly due to supply chain and material cost issues that I just described. Perth listings right now are about 48% below their 5-year average. When physical housing supply is that tight, prices will hold up and even surge under intense macroeconomic pressure because people have to live somewhere. Now let's look at the flatliners, Sydney and Melbourne. Listings there are trending the opposite direction entirely, up roughly 10% in Sydney, even higher in Melbourne, both flat, not falling yet. But the stall is there and the weight of supply is building against them. Interestingly, SQM Research, who I previously mentioned, has just flipped their forecast completely. They're now officially predicting price declines. Sydney down anywhere from 2 to 6%, Melbourne down 1 to 4%. Now, I want to be straight with you. SQM are the outlier right now. Most of the other major banks and similar Domain, KPMG are still expecting modest positive growth. So you've got two very different views. Some say growth, one says decline. That's not clarity, that's uncertainty. But what matters here is the track record. Lewis Christopher from SQM Research was one of the very few analysts to accurately call the 2022 market correction ahead of time. So when they break from the herd and flip their forecast negative, you pay attention. Their updated view is based on what's actually happening right now. Rates pushing towards 4.35%, all costs rising, pressure building in your daily today spend. Most of the other forecasts predate all of this. A market can stay unaffordable for years without crashing. Unaffordability and instability aren't the same thing. What we're seeing now is an unaffordable market starting to fracture at the edges. That's not a collapse, but it is pressure, and it affects your decisions right now. What's happening in Sydney and Melbourne right now is not seller confidence. People aren't listing because they want to upgrade. This is seller urgency. They're watching listings climb in their suburb. They're feeling their own household budget compressed to a breaking point, and they are desperately trying to get out and liquidate before the next rate hike hits. We've looked at the system. Now let's look at what this is actually doing to people, because this is where decisions start to change. Think about someone who bought in Melbourne's outer suburbs in 2021. 2 incomes, solid deposit. At that time, it all felt manageable. Right now, it looks very different. Repayments are up, costs are up. The room they had is gone. Market shifts don't happen on massive spreadsheets in CBD bank towers. They happen when ordinary people are forced to make defensive, painful decisions at their kitchen tables. That's exactly where the fracture actually occurs. Look at the human numbers behind the data. Mortgage stress was actually sitting at a 3-year low of 23.9% back in January. People thought we were out of the woods, but now the cash rate is 4.1. Roy Morgan's latest data shows that 24.9% of mortgage holders are officially in stress. That's 1.32 million Australians waking up every single day staring at the ceiling, wondering how they're going to make their payments for this month. And if rates hit 4.35% in May, which those 4 dissenting RBA board members were signalling might be necessary, that number is projected to climb to 1.43 million. And if you're in Victoria or Tasmania, you're in the most exposed cohort. But here's something that needs pushing back on. If you turn on the news, you hear politicians constantly doing victory laps about low unemployment. The official ABS numbers puts national unemployment at 4.3%. If the economy is essentially fully employed, how on earth are 1.3 million people drowning in mortgage stress? The official 4.3% is the number that gets printed in the headlines. It makes the government look good. But Roy Morgan measure what they call real unemployment. They put real unemployment at 10.6%, more than double. But more importantly for the property market, look at the total underutilisation. Distinct from the ABS figure, puts total underutilisation at a massive 22.2%, the highest since the chaotic early days of the pandemic. Here's the mechanism. People aren't necessarily losing their jobs entirely, which keeps them off the worst ABS statistics, but they're losing their full-time hours. Shifts cut from 40 hours a week down to 20. They're losing their financial margin, and the margin is what pays the mortgage. You might technically be employed, but you've lost the cash flow necessarily to service the loan at 4.1%. There's just no buffer left. It's not about losing your job. It's about losing your margin. That's not a strong labour market. That's one starting to soften. The numbers tell you the scale. Your bank statement tells you whether you are in with them. The property market doesn't break because a house is overvalued. It breaks the exact moment someone misses a payment. And the underutilisation data shows that nearly a quarter of the workforce is rapidly running out of the cash flow needed to make those payments. So questions are being asked. Do we sell? Do we hold? Do we cut back somewhere else? These decisions happen at the kitchen tables. And when enough people start making defensive calls at the same time, the market shifts. And that's how fractures spread. Okay, you came here looking for signs. Here's what they're telling us right now. Those are the 6 signs. Now remember the 3 triggers we talked about at the start. The 3 conditions that will fracture a market, all firing at once. Let's look at where each one sits right now. Number 1, credit tightening. It's tightening at the edges, not fully closed, but shrinking. Number 2, unemployment rising in the real data. Number 3, forced selling, starting to show up, not widespread yet, but it's there. Forced selling moves markets, not opinions, not headlines. Right now we don't have the full combination, but we're closer than most people realise, and we're close enough to watch. Can you hold on if nothing changes? And if those 3 triggers align, the market doesn't slow, it breaks. So if you're a buyer, don't watch the Saturday numbers, watch credit and the 3 triggers. If you're selling in Sydney or Melbourne, the window may be closing faster than the headline suggests. And if you're an investor, Perth and Brisbane still have supply dynamics working in your favour. Divergence is real and it's widening. So what does all this actually mean if you're trying to navigate this right now? The current situation in Australia, real estate, is not a timing problem, it's a holding problem. And affordability is not the same thing as instability. You might be completely priced out of your dream suburb, but that doesn't automatically mean a crash is imminent. If your income is stable, your buffer is strong, and you can handle rates staying higher for longer, then you're not buying into a collapse. But if your budget only works if rates fall, or if things need to go right for you to hold on, that's where the risk is. Hope is not a buffer, cash flow is. The market doesn't break when prices drop. It breaks the moment someone misses a payment. This isn't a collapse. It's a market under pressure, starting to fracture. What happens next won't come from headlines. It comes down to credit, jobs, and confidence. Just like the couple, 2 cars in the driveway, everything looking fine on the surface, until the invoice arrived. If you're relying on the headlines, you're already behind. The May RBA decision is the next trigger. After May, I'll revisit all of this. Subscribe now because you want the next one. This channel is where you come when you want the data, not the spin, the framework, the signal, and not the noise. Everything else is noise. Stay sharp. The next 60 days will tell us everything. I'm Barry Maskell.